Hello, I'm Dima Savitski, the bassoonist in the Aura Contemporary Ensemble at the University of Houston. It is my pleasure to be able to speak with Peter Van Zandt Lane, the composer of Hydromancer, who is based in Georgia. Thank you for allowing us to include your work in our one-on-one video project and for speaking with me today. I really enjoyed performing Hydromancer, and I'm interested in knowing what your inspiration for the work was, meaning how did you come up with Hydromancer as a title and the larger set of this that the work is included in, and why is it for bassoon and electronics, and even maybe you could share some insight about how you went about composing it.
Sure. So Hydromancer is the second of four pieces in a set of works called Mantea, which are four pieces for bassoon and electronics that I wrote between the years of 2008 and 2013. I think Hydromancer was composed mostly in 2010. And the reason that I have four pieces for bassoon and electronics is in large part because I'm a bassoonist myself. I grew up, playing bassoon I started playing bassoon in middle school, throughout high school. Bassoon was my scholarship instrument for my undergraduate, where I also did an undergraduate major in music composition. And then when I went off to grad school, I did a master's and doctorate up in Boston at Brandeis University. I was playing bassoon in contemporary music ensembles, and I was also doing electroacoustic music, a lot of music for instruments and electronics. And I found it was really useful to learn how to compose these kinds of pieces in an environment where I was playing the instrument myself, and I could record. I could kind of record ideas on the instrument and then see how it interacted with electronic sounds that I was designing in software. So my first, one of my first electroacoustic pieces was Aeromancer, which was in 2008, a piece for bassoon and electronics that got programmed a lot at like electroacoustic music festivals and contemporary music festivals. Hopefully because it was an interesting work, but also in large part because I could perform it myself. I could show up with my computer and my laptop and my bassoon, plug everything in and just go. And it's been picked up by a lot of other bassoonists at this point, but over the years I've played that piece and some of these other pieces quite a bit myself. And it's fun. It's a lot of fun for me to play these pieces. So Hydromancer in particular was sort of inspired. All of them are sort of deal with like some element, air, water, fire, time, and sounds of clockwork for the last one. And Hydromancer plays around with a mixture of pre-recorded sounds that were manipulated from the bassoon, from the instrument itself, and then also from like water sounds. And what you'll hear in the piece is a lot of like rushing water sounds that are sort of built off of samples of individual water droplets. And in electroacoustic music, this is something, it's a little bit of a trope. The water droplet as an individual sound is something that a lot of electronic music composers, I think, have sampled and played around with. And I sort of trace that back to 1958. I think there is a piece for tape by a composer named Hugh LeCane called Dripsody, which is this really fantastic 2.5-minute piece, all composed on magnetic tape that was made up of individual slices of tape that had water droplets on them running at different speeds. And so, I mean, I used a different computation engine to create some of those sounds. Actually, you can see it behind me. It's the Capybara 320, which is this unit that can sort of take the water droplet sample and spin it into these various textures that I thought mixed really nicely with some bassoon sounds, extended techniques such as tonguing the vocal without the reed on it, or key clicks or things like that. So yeah, that's the background and some of the sounds you'll hear and how I got into doing these kinds of pieces.
So, because you're a bassoonist and you're so interested in electronic music, and I looked at your pieces in general, it seems like you write a lot for those combinations, also for others. But would you say that Hydromancer is a representative piece of your style of writing, apart from just instrumentation?
Yeah, that's a good question. In a lot of ways it is. In some ways it's not. There's some weird things in there that I'm sure you as a player kind of found maybe partly interesting and part frustrating. I should start by saying when I wrote this piece, I was really kind of writing myself a piece. And so I did things to challenge myself as a player. And I found that writing, this was different from the first piece for bassoon and electronics because I actually wrote it. I didn't write it at the bassoon. I wrote actually most of the, the bassoon part out by hand on an airplane ride. So I'm sitting there on an airplane scribbling out these, you know, these ideas. And because what I think, if I think a little bit more abstractly, just in my head about the bassoon part, it pushes me to do things that are more technical in the instrument. Like Hydromancer was a really hard piece for me to play as a bassoonist, and I had to learn it. It wasn't just like, oh, I can play this, so I'm going to write it down. It was like, okay, I'm going to write this. This is hard, and now I'm going to go learn it. And in fact, the fourth piece in the set, Chronomancer, I did that to such a degree that I still can't play the piece. I wrote, and the person that premiered it, who's on faculty, was on faculty at the time at Manhattan School of Music and Boston Conservatory, totally nailed it. But it's like the one piece in the set that I just can't wrap my fingers around. In any case, yeah, it's I tend to be very interested in like motor rhythms, grooves. In my electroacoustic music, I'm really interested in ways in which I can kind of traverse the stylistic associations of like experimental electroacoustic music and electronic dance music. So like you'll hear a lot of things that evoke that the whole thing kind of breaks into this groove at the end that is very reminiscent of like kind of a mashup of like post-minimal music and EDM with water droplets jumping around in the background. And I think that's something that is a thread through a lot of my music, both electroacoustic and otherwise just acoustic concert music.
Okay. Do you feel like this piece conveys some kind of message central to your general output or anything like that?
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good question. I mean, it's a piece that's really about itself, but I think it's also it's you know, it's not really like a program piece in any sense. There's not really a narrative that's outside of just what's happening with the musical ideas. The extra musical idea is like the object of the water droplet, but the conversation I think I'm artistically trying to have is a little bit with the tradition of water droplets and electronic music, as well as just music for instruments and electronics in general, which goes back decades and has sort of its own trajectory of sort of stylistic tendencies and cliches and also things that, you know, just that work well and get used a lot. So in that sense, I think maybe that if there is a message, it's sort of that it's a piece that is conversing with its own materials, but also kind of conversing with the electroacoustic music tradition.
That's very interesting. As a performer, when I was learning this piece, I was thinking about what narrative should I find here, and I was trying different angles. And yeah, I think I ended up finding that there are two characters. There's the real bassoon and there is their electronic sound, and there's this duality in your piece.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good, and then I think that's just something I take for granted with any piece where you have the electronic presence and, you know, this disembodied electronic thing that can make any sound imaginable, and then the person in front of you who is playing, there's always that tension, right? And on one hand, you want to use the electronics to expand the world of the instrument and make the sounds that can come from that instrument seem expanded and sort of like that there's more things that are possible. But on the other hand, there's also kind of this like there's always going to be this human versus machine element that I think it's both inescapable, and it's also the reason I keep coming back to it, because it's so full of possibilities that it never stops being fun.
Okay, that's really good. The next question is a little bit more personal. And I found out that we musicians, we often create lists of favorite compositions that we often go to. in the past ages or more recent ones. And we go there to find inspiration or renew our sense of beauty or reignite the passion for music. Do you have a piece like that in your own output?
Oh, in my own output?
Yeah.
That I keep going back to. That's tricky, because like a lot of composers, I have a very tumultuous relationship with my pieces. Like I love them and then I hate them and then I love them, and sometimes that depends on what was the last performance I heard of it. So, but yeah, you know what's interesting is in the last year, I spend a lot of time working with wind ensembles, because I've written several pieces for collegiate wind ensembles that get performed a decent amount, and I travel around and go to those performances and get to coach wind ensembles, and it's like one of my favorite things to do. And in March of 2020, those all just ended. They just stopped, and my entire schedule just like hit the wall. And I found myself digging back into electroacoustic music, kind of doing something that I did more in grad school, writing pieces like this, and then have done a little bit, you know, since then, but I've sort of shifted my focus a little bit in the last few years to like larger ensemble things, like, you know, a trombone concerto I wrote a couple years ago, and some large wind ensemble pieces. And I think that this last year has sort of made me pivot a little bit towards electroacoustic music. And so I think, yeah, some of those pieces I have sort of reconnected to, and I think actually this set of bassoon pieces would be one of them, in one part because I kind of pulled a few of them out back in January for an outdoor concert in Florida where I was on a residency, and played them again, and I haven't played them in a few years. And I kind of reconnected with them, and also just having to think about electronic music a little bit more again recently in a more creative way, and thinking about like, well, what do I want to do next in this world? Because for the time being, all of my large ensemble pieces are on the shelf.
And that's interesting, and that is exactly that. Those bassoon pieces, they're they're so representative of your work that you like to go to them. So the last question is, what are you currently working on?
Sure. What am I currently working on? I've been trying to finish this big orchestra piece, three-movement orchestra piece called Symphonic Biomimetic, which is like a multi-movement orchestra work that has that draws inspiration from different ways in which our technology mimics nature. And it's a lot of fun, and it needs to be done already. And I'm hoping that it will get performed next season, assuming things can kind of move back into some semblance of normalcy with orchestra seasons. And what else? I've been editing a lot of. I've been trying to get a lot of pieces recorded, and some recent chamber pieces. Doing some edits on those. I just finished a saxophone quartet that was recorded as a split screen video, but I feel like I need to revise a little bit, as well as a piece for saxophone and percussion and electronics that also needs to be kind of completed and revised, even though they have already been performed in virtual settings. So yeah, that's what's on my agenda for the summer, because the semester is very busy right now, and mostly working on the kind of school-related projects here at UGA.
Yeah. Okay, it's been a pleasure to perform your music and talk to you.
Thank you so much, and yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, take care.